It is a pleasure to speak to you today. I would also like to thank J Street for inviting me. Now more than ever, we need organizations like J Street who support sane, rational U.S. policies in the Middle East. I don't have to tell you that the U.S. foreign policy debate is far too often dominated by hawkish voices whose answer to our problems always seem to involve more conflict and more war. J Street has played an important role by offering an alternative to those voices and promoting a vision of U.S. foreign policy based on diplomacy and peacemaking. J Street, thank you for your work and for your commitment to the principles of peace and justice for all people in Israel and Palestine. As I think everyone can agree, Israel deserves a great deal of credit for establishing a vibrant democracy and for its enormous advancements in fields like agriculture, healthcare, and environmental technology. The tragedy is that those major advances in so many ways have not been shared by the Palestinians who share this land. Recently, we witnessed the success Israel has had in vaccinating its citizens against the coronavirus. In fact, they are doing as well or better than any other country on earth in that regard. But that is not the case in the occupied territories. In the West Bank and Gaza Strip, Palestinians have received only a very small number of vaccines. Let us be clear. As the occupying power under international law, Israel is legally obligated to provide for the health and well-being of all people under its control. While the Oslo Accords gave the Palestinian Authority considerable responsibility for the health care of Palestinians, which they should also be urged to uphold, the Accords do not supersede Israel's responsibility under the Fourth Geneva Convention. The urgency of the moment, as both Israelis and Palestinians continue to face the threat of the COVID pandemic, demands immediate action. Israeli citizens cannot be safe from the pandemic until the Palestinians who live right next to them are also immunized. That is why I and several of my Senate colleagues sent a letter to Secretary of State Tony Blinken asking him to press the government of Israel to meet its obligations and make sure all the people under its control are given the vaccine as soon as possible. And this gets to one of the main messages I would like to send today, that the people of Israel cannot know true security until the people of Palestine do as well. There can be no debate but that the people of Israel have the right to live in peace and security without fear of violence or terrorism. But that is a right that the Palestinian people must also have. Unfortunately, it has become very clear that the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu does not agree. For the last 4 years, they had a partner in the Trump administration working with them to entrench a permanent one-state reality in which Israel controls the entire territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River in perpetuity, and in which the Palestinians are provided limited autonomy within a disconnected series of districts. I am here to say that that is not an acceptable outcome. We must be willing to proclaim loudly and clearly the occupation must end. Ultimately, of course, it will be up to the Palestinian and Israeli people themselves to make the choices necessary for a final resolution of this conflict. But the United States has a major role to play in helping broker an agreement that ends the occupation that began in 1967 and enables the self-determination, security, and equality of both peoples. I strongly believe that we must also be willing to bring real pressure to bear, including restricting U.S. aid in response to moves by either side that undermine the chances for peace. The truth is that the United States gives an enormous amount of military aid to Israel. It also provides some humanitarian and economic aid to the Palestinians. It is totally appropriate for the United States to say what that aid may and may not be used for. In terms of aid to Israel, in my view, the American people do not want to see that money being used to support policies that violate human rights and that treat the Palestinian people as second-class human beings. When we talk about restricting aid, it's important to note that this isn't about singling out any one country. It's about acting in an even-handed way in the region and making sure that American aid works to advance American values, not undermine them. In Israel and Palestine, I believe that advancing American values means supporting an independent Palestine alongside an independent Israel. Our vision, a vision we must never lose sight of, is of a region where all people live and work together in peace and dignity, a region in which all people can have a decent life and live free of violence and corruption and authoritarianism. I understand very well that given the realities of today, that vision appears distant, but it is a vision that we cannot and must not give up on. Thank you all very much.